Hey everyone, it is Bond here for the Ghost Furnace. Tonight we have a few things going for us. One of them is Nick is very excited, and we are excited to have episodes, but it is rare that Nick will text me even earlier in the day, letting me know how excited he is. I'm really looking forward to tonight, but to give you guys a little bit of context before we get into the story that Nick has, I just want to let you guys know, I know we've talked a lot recently about doing on-site episodes. Those are coming. The weather has not cooperated recently. Anybody else in the Northeast knows the last few weekends have typically looked great, but then there's just ice everywhere. We do plan on getting out to a few locations over the next few weeks, so we're going to have those for you. We have a few cases and stories that we're doing some research on as well. And additionally, I'm happy to say we have a few interviews coming up again. I know it's been a little while since we've had a proper interview on here, but we're going to have some stories from at least two individuals, it sounds like, of very, very different kinds of stories than we've had in the past. It sounds like we don't want to give too much away, obviously, because we're still kind of getting them together and very, very excited about it. But like, again, for tonight, I have a very excited Nick who is going to be giving us some stories. I'm going to be learning this information along with you guys. So
yeah, I've refused to tell you anything, not even what the subject's about or where it's from. But before we get to that, I have some really shattering, devastating, this could be a cultural shift news to break to you. Brendan Bond, how do you feel about falafel?
I mean, I've only had falafel a few times, but I mean, I would say generally I have a positive disposition towards falafel.
Okay, let me share something with you, because as you know, being a child born in the 80s, we're dominated. The cultural landscape was dominated by chicken McNuggets and yogurt. And then we moved into an era of the bloomin' onion and wraps.
Yes.
I'm here to tell you that I was bitten in the face by inspiration the other day when I said to my wife, I said, listen, love falafel. I got this idea. Don't want them oily, right? Don't want a greasy falafel. That's not good if you're not good at keeping the oil hot enough. And because I have no patience, I rarely get the oil hot enough before I plop them in the oil. Just like you say, you burn the roof of your mouth at least twice a month because you can't wait for the microwave food to cool down.
Today it was at an Italian restaurant, yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that. Is the skin peeling on the roof of your mouth? And
it currently is, yes.
Okay. Falafel made inside a waffle iron. And now I'm here to tell you we did it, and it was a success. It was a success. It was not oily. It was real crispy all around. Came out of the waffle iron real easy. And then I just took my garlic cream sauce and just like dunked a little bit of it. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And we had some dill chicken with it. It was really good. And do you know what I call this culinary creation?
I can't think of a good pun, so no, go ahead. What do you call
falafel waffle? I really thought you were just going to blow out falafel waffle. That's right. But listen to me. I am very excited about the future of falafel waffle. I think I foresee sweeping dividends for anybody who wants to get in on the ground floor on this. And if you don't believe me, try it. You can make your falafel from a mix, put it in your waffle iron. Look, waffle irons are never easy to clean to begin with, but listen, it really wasn't bad. It came out easy. Falafel, it's nature's candy, but now there might be a more perfect way. So that was my groundbreaking news. I wanted to share it with you. It's idiotic, but I really do feel like, hey, the bloomin' onion had like a 7-year run of gastronomical had a long dominance.
Run, and I would say avocado toast has peaked, and I think the people are ready for something else.
They're calling for it, and the answer is falafel waffle. Whew.
If you were that excited about this.
I'm still excited, though.
Yeah.
I remain excited for this story I want to share with everybody for a few reasons. One, it's been making the rounds a lot lately, and I have so much to say about it. I'm going to try to break it into two parts. I have so many notes all around me that you can hear, and they are in all different places. I felt like a madman because as I'm getting the facts, I'm doing the digging, I'm going through the newspaper archives, and I'm putting like Post-it notes on the wall. They are everywhere. There's no logic to it. I'm going to try to keep myself together. I'm going to try to stay calm, and I'm going to present to you this story. So I'm going to deliver the story as it's most often told. Then I want to talk to you about it a little bit. And then I'm going to take it down another route. Again, I'm kind of the doubting Thomas. And so just a hint, that's kind of where it's going to go. And I think I can stand pretty firmly on the statements I'll be making at that time. But without further noise, let me kind of present the facts to you, or at least the story, not the facts, the story as it's most commonly heard. Now, Bond, are you familiar with the story of the haunted Golden Eagle, the cursed automobile?
No, this is not a story I'm familiar with.
Now, the Golden Eagle itself is not the name of, it's the name of the vehicle, but not necessarily the model. The vehicle itself is actually a 1964 Dodge 330. Now, if you saw a Dodge 330, you remember I had that old Impala, that 65 Impala. Mm-hmm. Very similar car, very much mid-60s sort of thing. Not the muscle car look, but it had the long look, the side-by-side lights. Very similar to my old Impala, a little boxier than that. But I'm not going to go into it too much automotively. 330 limited edition Dodge. I believe it's part of the Polara platform. I don't know Dodge as much as I know GM stuff. Okay. So basically, there was this vehicle purchased by, supposedly, because I can't confirm this, but this is, again, how the story goes, the police department in Orchard Beach, or Old Orchard Beach, Maine, which is a kind of an older resort town out by Saco Bay. In fact, if you know where Portland, Maine is, and if you know one place in Maine, it might as well be Portland. It's a little south of Portland, Maine, along the coast, or a little north of Biddleford, which is the better name for a town.
Oh, unequivocally, yes.
And I'm acquainted with an old-time fiddler that lives in Biddleford, technically the town of Saco, but whatever. Okay. So this police squad supposedly purchases this Dodge 330. It's a pretty big vehicle. Supposedly it can fit 8 people. I question that. That sounds a lot like the B-52's Chrysler that seats about 20.
Yeah, that seems, yeah.
But it is a pretty quick vehicle, and it is my understanding that it was used as like fire chief cars and things like that. So this use fits the car. At one point, it was actually sold over to a private person, and then shortly thereafter picked up by the fire department. The reason the story goes that the police sold the vehicle was because 3 of the officers who drove the vehicle either committed suicide or were part of a murder-suicide with their families. Okay?
Jeez.
Right. So they sold the vehicle. Again, it supposedly went into the hands of a doctor who repainted it because it was painted in police uniform colors. He painted it like a gold color, got the name Golden Eagle. It is then, after a while, utilized by the fire company there. And then in 83 is sold again and purchased by a private family. And to this day, supposedly, I'll try not to say that too much, but to this day, it is still owned by that family. So again, just the story, 64 Dodge, used as a police vehicle for a brief period of time. Supposedly, the officers who drove that vehicle, 3 of them committed suicide and or murder-suicide, killing their families. And then it's sold to a doctor. He repaints it, covers up, so it's not looking like a police vehicle. It's then used by the fire department, and then it's purchased around 1983 by a private family. The stories go on to say that the family uses this car, nothing bad happens to them. However, the vehicle is supposedly struck by lightning on multiple occasions. Other people that come into contact with the car have issues. Some of them die. Supposedly, wildlife is found around the car dead, having been electrocuted. Okay. There's one other story that's told where the woman who owns the car was driving with somebody who is a pastor's wife. The lap belt comes undone, the door pops open, and she's being dragged out of the car as it's going down. She's trying to stop, but the car just keeps speeding up.
What?
Yeah. So these are the stories. The owner takes it in to be reviewed by a mechanic. The mechanic can't make any of these things happen, can't make the door pop open. You remember I had an old Volkswagen where the rear doors would fly open randomly until I welded them shut.
Sometimes on 79, yeah.
Scary stuff.
Yeah, no, I remember that car very well.
Yeah, that was how I learned to drive a stick. But so it's not improbable that could happen. But usually when a door is failing like that, a mechanic can pretty easily diagnose and replicate the conditions that necessary to make that door pop like that. So it goes on that, especially after the incident with the pastor's wife, who again was dragged out of the car. The story goes that she wanted nothing to do with the car, wouldn't go near it, said, "You need to get rid of this car, it's haunted." It causes a big rift between the owner of the vehicle and the local community, particularly the church community. And members of the church, the story goes, take to vandalizing this vehicle. Some people who get too close to the car are found dead. The pastor's wife, if I recall correctly, was later decapitated in an auto accident. These are the stories around the car. Okay. So again, this is in Maine. This is a 64. Very early on, it gets this reputation for being a cursed vehicle. And a lot of what you'll see story-wise will say, is this the inspiration for Stephen King's Christine?
Yeah, I mean, that's that's kind of the natural place you go. Yeah.
Right, the 58 Plymouth Fury. So, okay, that's the story. So, what's going through your mind hearing all that jazz?
One, I'm surprised that I've never heard of this, which is interesting, because again, it's if that many people around this vehicle wound up like dead basically for one reason or another, it has all the makings for a great story, because part of that obviously is just like, coincidence. That's the first thing you think after X amount of things, Other stuff, there's a lot of that's hard to corroborate, like the animals being found dead, it being hit by lightning, stuff like that. However, like it being in a small town, obviously it would be known by people, and I think that once something gets a reputation, it's hard to break that, obviously. But then you get to things like you said, the door coming open and the passenger being like kicked out of it, basically. That's one of those things where, like, if that really happened, like, what possible explanation could there be? That's like the deviating story, though, right there. Like, to me, everything else sounds like it's a cursed object.
Now, I wanted to ask you a question, and I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
I wanted to kind of get your opinion on your thoughts of like a cursed object or a haunted object. Kind of what's your feeling about that?
So I think the cursed or haunted objects, like, again, I think they fall into two different categories, but both of them, I think that kind of encapsulation of cursed / haunted is one of the most common things I would think in paranormal. I mean, I think people see them in movies and in stories and it's very easy to adopt those archetypes, I think, into your own life, because a cursed object is just something that's has bad luck associated with it, whether it is something as simple as a thing that doesn't work right very often and causes a lot of stress. You know, you say, oh, this thing's cursed, or something that is, you know, has a little more weight behind it, like a object that has been cursed by some sort of nefarious hand, whether that is a, you know, some sort of shamanic practice or just someone's ill intent. But now haunted objects, I think a lot of times people ascribe a certain agency to because we think that someone's essence has been trapped in them or something. There's some connection to a previously living being, which isn't like that crazy of a step necessarily for most people to take, because I think all of us have objects that were either owned or given to us by people who we really care about. And we think that there's, you know, something to that.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that entirely in that, you know, I am not the most sentimental person. I don't believe in a cursed object or a haunted object. I believe in haunted people. Mm-hmm. And I'll say two things to that score. I know I have a banjo that I inherited from a very important person in my life, a seminal person in my life. And I think very much there is in essence, it's the connection not only of memory, but the oils from his fingers are in the wood of that banjo. Mm-hmm. And so they're in a very real, intangible way. He's part of that. And I've brought this example up quite a bit. I think about it often. Mm-hmm. It's the only thing I have. It's a deep connection. You know, I have some of his writings too, but that's what I think of that banjo in particular. And when I mean haunted objects, I think about this. If this story, let's just take it at face value here about this car. If you are a person that knows this history of this car, it's going to almost be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes,
that
agree.
Because you've bought into the story. It makes me think of the Hope Diamond. You talk about cursed objects. I think that was the first one I ever read about as a kid. And a lot of people were quick to point out, well, look at the type of people that were getting this. These weren't, and there's also, look at all the people that have visited the Hope Diamond. At some point, we are all going to encounter tragedy, and to, you know, scapegoat an inanimate object is a little silly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think that you're kind of onto something there, where something we come back to a lot is intent and presumption around these things obviously play a big part. And when it comes to haunted objects, cursed objects, if you get something from someone and they tell you, oh, this thing is cursed, this thing's haunted, and then things start happening, whether those things are manifesting just as a result of you're looking for them now because you now have a cursed / haunted object in your house, or if it's just coincidence, either way, you know, we now have, you now have an impetus for that activity, regardless of how reasonable it is, if that stuff would have happened anyway.
If I gave you this haunted teacup tomorrow and nothing happened, wouldn't you be a little disappointed? Like, it's not working?
I'd be a little disappointed because it looks like a nice cup too. Like, I mean, it looks like you know, it's a good cup. Along with the Hope Diamond, you look at something like I think most people are familiar with the idea of the curse of King Tut's tomb and things of that nature, which, again, you look at the people, look at what they did, things like that, and whether or not you quote unquote believe in a curse, I think has a lot to do with who you think is wrong in the situation. There are a lot of people in a lot of cultures that just generally think digging up dead people is not a great idea. It's one of those things that's taboo, and using a quote unquote curse is a way to give agency or give a rationale to that, instead of talking about the acts of desecration and robbing cultural artifacts. Like that's what really should be talking about, why these bad things happen to bad people. But instead you say, oh no, it's the curse. That's kind of flippant and I think it's culturally insensitive or inappropriate.
It's almost like something that you just assume because it's a cliche.
It is, and it's
like what we've talked about. Like, there's places that, of course, it's painted. Look at it; it's an old Victorian, and someone hasn't kept up with the paint.
Exactly. But going back to the cursed objects and everything, I think that does have a lot to do with it. And how those things fit into our existing culture, because it's just the other end of the spectrum from what you're saying about like your banjo, like that thing is important to you and you believe there are real tangible things about it that you hold dear for, I think, like you said, obviously good reasons. The other end of the spectrum is things that,
it's very much the same sort of, it's coming from the same place, I feel like. And this is one thing where when I think about that banjo, or I think about some other old instruments, or just old items I have that I know they've passed through other people, even if I don't know who those people were, I have a reverence for that, which the closest thing I say I would have to a religious leaning, or at least this is something that I can see in the religious that I can wrap my head around, that I can relate to personally, is a reverence for some objects, because of, not because of what they represent, but because of who they represent. And I think that's a good thing. I have a friend, we both have a friend who's kind of interested in some early paganism and things like that, and nature worship. And you lose me at worship, but you have me at reverence. And I think there's something very beautiful about the reverence of everyday things.
I think, again, we're talking about, this is kind of getting into the philosophical weeds, I think, a little bit. But when we talk about whether or not objects have any inherent value or any inherent definition, it's all us putting those things onto these things. There's no way to get around that. The impetus or the a priori elements of anything that we're talking about is a blank slate. It's us putting all this on it. And so I think that the same mechanism that you're talking about with like the banjos and these things and that reverence, which I think most of us would agree is like a positive thing. I think you can also have reverence or respect for something that's on the other side of that spectrum, where it goes from something you want to something you don't want. Like, there are things out there that just be based on what they are, where they've been, who they've been associated with. I don't want anything to do with them. I don't want them around. I don't want them at all, kind of thing. I think it's the same mechanism we're talking about, where we put the importance on these things. They don't inherently have anything. And I think that's where the idea of like a haunted car, in this sense, haunted or cursed car, is interesting, because like we're automatically assigning some sort of animism or agency to a car by saying it is cursed or haunted.
I get what you're saying.
The car on its own can't be any of those things without us interacting with it.
Or if we associate it with negative things,
correct? Yes, that's a better
things that happen afterwards. We associate with the car. It becomes that scapegoat. It becomes that something bad has happened to me, and it's not that bad things just happen sometimes. It has everything to do with this car that I already know bad things are associated with. And of course, now this is my burden. So let me get into the second part, because this is where I'm kind of like worked up, a little excited, and
because was the dance you just did. That's why I'm laughing.
Is so good. Nobody saw that. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, but please, yes, continue.
Oh, no problem. I almost don't know where to begin. So I'll begin by saying this. The fact that you were not familiar with this story is a little, but not too surprising, because even though most of the events circulating around this vehicle occur in the 60s and in the 80s and 90s, some reason there doesn't seem to be too much in the 70s, this story doesn't really start making the rounds until 2018. And I first heard it not just on YouTube, but on a couple automotive websites. I saw it making the rounds. And here's another thing to take in. Like I said, I'm trying to pull myself together because I almost don't know where to begin with this. The town of Old Orchard Beach is a town of less than 10,000 people. It has around 9,000, a little less than 9,000 people in it. It may have had a few more in the mid-1960s, but I don't believe so. I didn't look that deep into the demographics. But let me say this. The town I live in has almost that many people in it. And if 3 police officers, suicide, murder, suicides, that would be huge news. And
huge. Yeah, it'd be insane.
Huge. We had an officer stabbed here last year who's just now back on the force. And it's been like the going story for 8 months. And I understand why, but
for sure.
I can't find those stories. If anybody is good with newspaper archives and happens to find stories of that kind, please let me know. But that's not out there in the research that I've done, and I've been on this most all the live long day. The stories don't appear until around 2018. What's more, the person who owns the vehicle, who's part of the family that purchased the vehicle around 1983, well, let me walk around this a little bit. She is a writer of many things. She is a writer of a series of books and spin-offs of those books that she's been at, according to her, since about 1978, according to her. I'm not going to say her name because you can find it easily enough. I don't want this woman, to think that I'm meaning ill intent, because I'm not. I also don't want to feed into this type of attention that I think she's after. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit. One of the things that all of the articles and commentary and storytelling, one of the things they all share in common is they make that reference to the book, the Stephen King book, Christine. And because it's in Maine, because it's a haunted car, because it takes place around the same time period as Christine, a lot of people start out with the car that inspired Christine. And I think that's bunk because, like I said, I can't find any references to this vehicle before 2018. I'm almost certain that was the earliest I could get. You were going to say something.
No, I'm just looking some of the stuff up as you're talking. That's all.
Okay.
Nick's being very polite by saying if there's anyone out there better at looking through old newspaper archives than him. We do double check each other's work whenever we, can't find something typically. But usually if one of us can't find something, the other one can't either. And that's what I'm seeing so far.
Thank you. So I think there's a few reasons why this story started making the rounds. One, it's a pretty captivating story. When you hear the story as I delivered, other people would deliver it far better than me, but it is intriguing. And it is so close to Christine, and it's not just in storyline, but in actual location of the author, Stephen King, being in the state of Maine.
I was about to say, yeah, he's from Maine, so like at least that leads a little bit of credibility, I would think.
But again, if these stories were generally making the rounds 20, 30 years before, but it is convenient because then anybody writing an article about this can use that plug, that this car that inspired Christine. So
and it immediately adds some provenance to the story that isn't there.
So again, the woman that owns the vehicle, it's been in her family since 83. I have no reason to doubt that. I have no reason to doubt that it was used by the fire/police in the area. So I'll take that at face value. But again, she's known for writing horror and other such fiction, fantasy and whatnot. I have some things I want to say there in a minute. What's more, she has been accused very publicly, including on like Amazon, of plagiarism, of plagiarizing other writers. Really.
It's not great. It's not great.
This story comes too close, not to plagiarism, but let's be honest, everything lines up really good for this story to become very popular. And I can understand why it's become so popular, I guess is what I'm getting at. Now, one of the things that this person has written that wasn't a horror or a horror romancing is, this is the title, An Author's Guide to Twitter, how I added 3,000 followers in 8 days, with bonus, how I gained 500 followers in a single hour. Now, I don't know about Twitter. I know Ghost Furnace, there is a Ghost Furnace Twitter thing. You can know right now, if I haven't said it before, I know nothing about it, but that is a book. That is a book, and that is a book that tells me something about the personality of a person, maybe.
Or at least like professionally what they're doing. It tells you that gaining Twitter followers for business reasons is something that this person spends a lot of time and effort trying to do, and that in itself isn't a good or a bad thing at all. But it does say that, like, okay, this person values exposure. And granted, without reading the book, we really don't know how much of that is like, you know, if she has a chapter about like how to add provenance to a story and make it up out of thin air. Like, it's like, chapter 14 looks very suspicious at that point. No, but yeah, it definitely does say something that, again, isn't necessarily good or bad, but is definitely curious, we'll say.
That's a good way, because again, I want to make it very clear that I'm not coming down on this person. But let me get a little deeper yet. The person, she states that she owns several haunted vehicles, and she bedazzles them.
Okay.
She bedazzles them by gluing things to it and painting them, and that's cool. Nothing wrong with any of that.
Just to like rewind a little bit, she claims to own several haunted vehicles,
and she takes them around to car shows.
These are some red flags for me. I know we've talked about this before, especially with anything paranormal related. As soon as not that people shouldn't make money off of like their work, like if you're like a filmmaker or a writer or whatever, that's just like way too convenient for it to also be aiding in your profession.
Hey, you gotta sell that haunted fleet of vehicles, Brendan. A haunted vehicle, it doesn't just
haunt
gas
itself.
Just doesn't grow on trees, right? It doesn't haunt itself. It doesn't tow itself around these car shows. You gotta. All of these things are just things. They don't confirm nor disperse the truth.
They have nothing to do with the
vehicle.
validity of this Golden Eagle car being haunted.
But at the same time,
but
so and again, I sound like I'm laughing, but it's just a lot. I am laughing, but it's just a lot.
Oh man, I don't know.
I don't know either. I will say this, to this person's credit, she does have several supposedly haunted cars that she has bedazzled spectacularly.
She has bedazzled.
She has written a number of books, which can be found on places like Amazon and Goodreads and other places. So she seems to be a motivated person. Yeah. Yes, she has stood accused of plagiarism of authors, which I have also never read. So I can't speak to that.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say the one thing above all else that impresses me is this. This whole Golden Eagle haunted car might be this person's most successful work of writing, of fiction. And I mean that sincerely. I think it's this story, like I said, you look it up. It's making the rounds, the haunted car, the Golden Eagle. I think with all of the preponderance of circumstantial evidence around here, I think I stand on firm footing when I say these stories are bunk. If you find anything relating to the supposed history that can be verified through newspaper reports, please share that with us. But even though it's bunk, it has been a very successful story, making the rounds on other podcasts like this and in several automotive publications and folklore publications that I enjoy. So in 4 years' time, I mean, in like some serious periodicals, this story has gotten around. Many of them quote her, and she has said, if this car, she believes the car is haunted, but she doesn't believe it's out to kill everybody because her family's owned it since 1983, abouts, and all of them are alive. So there you go. I think this has been a very successful modern fiction.
I mean, does this fall under the category of creepypasta, you think?
I think it doesn't exist. I do not think it's being delivered as that.
Yeah, like that's kind of how I see it. Where like in my mind, a creepypasta doesn't exist until it's on the internet. And it sounds like this might fall into that. But you're right. It's not being it's being touted as having fake provenance.
That's exactly it.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. That's the thing that all of these places, again, a lot of whom I respect and enjoy the material of. When I went in looking into this, it was a story that I had heard fairly recently. I think about a year and a half ago. And I was just going through the back of my mind, and I wanted to dig a little deeper into it. And like I said, I wasn't able to verify some of those earlier accounts. The only things I could verify were things that came out in 2018. And it made me take a very different turn with the type of conversation we were going to have tonight. So, yeah, I think I've said all I can say about it. I'm going to try to be quiet and listen to you.
I think it says a lot about where we get our understanding of our literacy around these things. Whether or not we can read something, take in its credibility, and then make a decision on some sort of like a scale of how reliable the information is. Because that's something we're taught to do with regular media in any shape or form, whether it is a textbook when you're in fourth grade, or a novel, or something that's about, facts, or something that is about like something that's more folklore related, or history, or like I said, even like fiction.
Think about this, and this is something you and I have talked about. We have never had a more easy time or access to fact checking, and look at how little is fact checked. I've gotten to the point, I know you've heard me share this axiom, when I hear a story, the more I want to believe it's true, it seems that inversely, the more I want to believe something is true, the more likely it is not to be true to some degree. And something you said there made me think too about culture jamming. And I know there's been many episodes where the news media has been exploited because their desire to be first on something has been exploited to have them put out news that is not real. And I want to avoid the term fake news because that's become such a political thing.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is they have done that. And it's because people who should know better didn't take the time to fact check. And I think about a lot of different famous examples from negative lands. The noise bands claim that their song made a young person commit murder his family, and the notoriety around the fake news story that then followed them was enough to help fund their cross-country tour. Or James Randi, the illusionist and skeptic, had he created like a fake guru, and they sent out a press release and made all these claims. They could have very easily and readily been debunked, but nobody did the fact checking. This story, I think, is, as soon as I started digging a little deeper, there were a lot of things that said, this is just, there's no good reason for me to believe this is true, but I can see why people want to, because it's a good story.
Oh, it's a great story.
If you're publishing a magazine, you can be like, hey, look, this is the story that inspired Christine.
Yeah, and I think that's I think I may get a little high horsey or a little soapboxy here, but I apologize. In a case like this, we are seeing quote unquote content passed off as culture, where we have we're told, oh, this is folklore, this is part of the history of this town, this is something that's affected all these families, it is part of who we are, it's a story, you know, and it has gravity as a result, and it probably has a lesson to teach us because it's been vetted and passed down through all these people. That's what we're told it is, but really, like you said, from like if you're like a magazine editor or someone running a website, you don't see that as that. You see, oh, this is a great thing to fill up some space and get us some clicks.
I like what you said there too. I agree with you, and I think it's important to remember. Just like I love the news, but I know I should be skeptical of a lot of it, and I shouldn't take everything at face value. I love folklore. I believe that most of it can be boiled down to a very small event that then gets propagated.
Mm-hmm.
I can love folklore and not believe it at face value.
Absolutely.
And this is one of those things where it didn't go through the folklore process.
And that's kind of what's happening is I think that the environment of people wanting to, again, pass off cultural artifacts as content, that is kind of the thing that lets things like this get legs and start running away, basically. In that way, I'd say it kind of it is similar but different from creepypasta, because creepypasta is usually just a whole cloth good story that, you know, just takes off after that. But
yeah, I think with creepypasta, and I'm not super familiar with it, it seems like some folktales start as tall tales where they are deliberately over the top. They are for entertainment. I see creepypasta as being much the same.
Yes.
There's a bunch of people participating that know, but the problem is when impressionable people and people outside that circle read into these, and then you've got problems because there are some people that just are not reasonable.
Yeah, I think that comparing tall tales to creepypasta is a pretty good analog. No one thought that Paul Bunyan was actually as tall as a mountain. You know,
right?
Like that wasn't like oh yeah, as tall as a mountain, but like not really. You know, creepypasta, like it's like, oh yeah, there's these stories of these stories about Slender Man or whoever, and it's like, yeah, but not actually, but it's just a good story, you know?
Right.
And it might have a purpose. It still tells us something. And even if it's just entertainment, and that's fine.
If there's one thing that the world has taught me is that there is somebody that is willing and eager to believe in anything. And now those adherents might be very few and far between, but we have this wonderful megaphone. The technology that we have now has amplified such voices. And if the Kool-Aid Man weren't created strictly for a very well-defined commercial purpose, but came out through this kind of modern folk tale, there would be somebody out there that would earnestly believe that the Kool-Aid Man was a real living thing. But I just think this is something that people should do the tiniest bit more digging into to try to verify. And when they do, they should walk away with what was an enjoyable story and not something that is passed around as like, is it real or is it not?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way of putting it. And I think that you're right that it's okay for something to be not real and us still enjoy it. You know, like those both can exist. Sometimes it doesn't matter where it comes from. Sometimes it does, you know, but that should be a decision that people make based off of proper context, not off of being misguided or misled purposely.
The one thing I was able to verify was the owner claimed there was a young man who murdered his family in this town. And again, not a huge town, not a small town either. 9,000 people. I imagine Maine, that's a pretty sizable community.
Mm-hmm.
The owner of the car claimed that when he was a child, he played around the car, and so that the car was responsible for these deaths. And for those claims, the community kind of came down on this person because like this is too much like you exploiting the tragedy. And there's so much news about there's so much news about that incident that I couldn't find about the supposed police officers that again it really drives home the recency of this.
You think of the things that are written about, in most newspapers, especially daily newspapers, and how much of that stuff, even from most of those small places, has been digitized, especially back into that era. If it happened, it would probably be out there. And again, if someone else finds it, please let us know.
And if you do find it, where could they send those articles to, Brendan?
You could send those articles, any comments, or any of your stories to the Ghost Furnace Podcast at gmail.com. Or you can reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. I think we also accept smoke signals and carrier pigeons.
Indeed, we do.